that is one of my favorite carols. Thanks, Dennis, for putting that together. Yes, Gustav Holst, yes. It reminds me of one of the most important theological controversies that I know of. I call it the Great Christmas Carol Controversy of 1992. It involved one party who will remain nameless, who loves Christmas music, starting to play Christmas songs around, I don't know, end of July, sometimes August, around the house at full volume. Again, remaining nameless. And the sister of this nameless person, the saintly woman who had to live with this person and could have probably won. The powers that be probably would have sided with her in this great Christmas Carol controversy of 1992 of just cutting off Christmas carols altogether until, say, I don't know, December. It would have been reasonable. But this kind girl who had a sensitive heart for her little brother decided that October would be the date. And that was where I learned how to negotiate as a lawyer. I started in July and I got October. And so I had 3 months to go. I mean, the person who did this had 3 months to go. And now, in fairness, we were living in Rochester, New York. Winter starts in Rochester, New York. I mean, it never really stops. It's just sort of just going from July on. One year in Buffalo, we had snow for 8 months in a row. And so that was what kind of got me in the season. Now, that's not the resolution of the Great Christmas Carol controversy of 1992 is not the only controversy there's been around music. One of my favorite things about this time of year are the carols. And the carols, it's not just what's in them, it's also, you know, the subtle little ways that they're just kind of wrong or inappropriate, really, when you think about some of the things in them. And I stumbled on this as I was doing some research for this sermon, and it goes, it's the language round yon virgin in Silent Night, which is a lot of people's really favorite carol. And so a young person was writing on this website called Thinking Through Christianity. It's an interesting site. There's like a brain on it with a cross in the middle of it's like thinking about Christianity. And the person was writing that they had always thought it was that Mary was plump and round, like round, the round virgin, and then realized, did the research and realized that it really just meant that around, that things were, people and animals were gathered around this person. And they were also trying to figure out what yon meant, that it might have had some special meaning, but they realized it was just an old way of saying, you know, the one over there, that yonder, short for yonder. And so they were it was a very short article because they thought they were going to write something longer, and they realized it was just gathering around that virgin over there. It's really what round yon virgin meant. And it gave me a chuckle, mostly from the writer's disappointment at discovering what this language meant. And that's when we get into language, this is what happens. When you start realizing what things really mean and how similar they are, but language is important. There are even more, I mean, this issue of the virgin birth, even from that, I just kind of geeked out. I'm just going to take you through sort of some territory here. It's something important to our Unitarian strand, actually, of Unitarian Universalism. The Socinians of the 1550s, this is a group that were really the forerunners of Unitarians. They got their name, the Socinians, after the name of Lelio Sozzini, Sozzini, and then later by his nephew Fausto Sozzini. So Socinians comes from Socini. If you're ever thinking of going to the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, pay attention. If you ever want to be a minister, this is very important stuff. They were a group that that negated the virgin birth, that said that didn't really happen, or at least questioned it. And it was what led to one of the most important things in the Unitarian world, which was this system of belief that the Unitarian Transylvanian Church embraced, that led to what's called the Edict of Torda in January of 1568. I mention this because it was one of the things I missed on the Ministerial Fellowship Committee when I was being grilled to become a minister. The Edict of Torda just went right out of my brain. The very kind people who sat there sort of like, I just had to confess. I was like, I know I'm supposed to know what that is, but it's been a long trip from Hawaii and they didn't want to hear about that. But I just said, I know I'm supposed to give you some really smart answer right here, but it's completely slipped my mind. So I got one apparently because someone else came up with some other sort of historical question for me, which I did remember, thank heavens. So this whole period of religious freedom that's talked about in the 1550s to the 1560s in Transylvania was an interesting time. A lot of people think about this as just true religious freedom, and that's not really what it was. What it was, there were three nations trying to coexist in this area, and they were fighting about belief. They were fighting about religion. Some people say the Bible is less about a relationship between God and humans and more about a relationship between humans and land, humans and territory. I mean, if you read the Bible, especially the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, it's a lot of discussion about what land someone wants to be in, what land someone goes to. And so it was no different in Transylvania in the 1550s when these groups were, these three different nations were battling. And so this was a compromise that allowed each church that was in the area. There were some Lutherans there. There were some other free-thinking Calvinists. And they decided that each church would be allowed to call their own minister. That's really what the Edict of Torda said. We hear a lot about it being like true religious freedom. What it really was employment freedom. You could employ whomever you chose as your minister, and then they could say whatever they wanted from the pulpit. And so really, that helped quell the actual territorial debates that were happening at the time. It was about a land in strife. And this was not the only time this discussion came up around territory. Joseph Priestley, who came to the United States from England, was the discoverer of the element oxygen and set the stage for the actual church that did, on its sort of political platform, reject the idea of the virgin birth. And this person, Joseph Priestley, began preaching about Unitarianism in the United States and eventually started that new territory of a place where you could believe these things differently than the way they were told in certain strands of Christianity. So this was yet another person. The very fact of not ascribing to this belief is what gave Joseph Priestley some fame in the area. And he and John Adams became friendly, and that was that. Then later, actually, he got embroiled in some political stuff. But again, that's not the only area. Also, very famously in the United States, Harry Emerson Fosdick, some of you may not know who this is, but at the time in the early 20s, this was a big time minister who was brought up on heresy charges at the First Presbyterian Church in New York City because he questioned the virgin birth. He was someone who thought about the realities of life and biology and questioned maybe that we might be learning something new, and he was run right out of his church. But he did all right because the Rockefellers built him a church known today as the Riverside Church, which is the tallest church in New York City and one I used to work at. And it was quite a very nice piece of territory for him, so it worked out. So I'm just sharing that one idea in A Christmas Carol can go from the somewhat comical to the quite politically and theologically charged atmosphere. And so this time of year, these ideas of these ways of seeing things differently or in different lights reminds me of Bill's reading today by John Marsh that talks, it says this in it: if you're going to meditate by candlelight, do not hurry to light the candle. The glow may concentrate your energies, but it will cost you the contours of the room. It reminds me, recently I was on Big Island. I went for the lunar eclipse a few weeks ago. And we were hiking up to a mountain by moonlight. And when we got up there, I was remembering my first stargazing experience in 5th grade. And what happened then was we were in Camp Goddard in Oklahoma and on top of a mountain. And the person there leading the stargazing said, everyone lay down, look up, now close your eyes. And so everyone closed their eyes for at least 30 seconds and was told, do not turn on any flashlights, do not turn on any light, and that this is the best way to actually see the stars. And we all closed our eyes and gazed at the darkness of the back of our eyelids and waited those patient, quiet 30 seconds. I'm sure there was some giggling. I'm sure someone said, why are you touching me? But whatever happened, after those 30 seconds, we opened up our eyes and we saw stars like those little Dallas kids had never seen. We saw the Milky Way stretching out in bands ahead of us. And that memory came back these few weeks ago when we were on the mountaintop over on the Big Island and looking at the enormous expanse of these stars. In People Look East, actually, they talk about the bowl. In the 3rd verse, that talks about the bowl adding one more light. And at the time, that poetry meant the bowl as the entire canopy of the heavens overhead is the bowl they were referring to, adding one more light. And it felt like that, like we were in this bowl, we were in this mix, we were in this sea, almost at sea in stars. And it was a beautiful, beautiful place to be. Because this time of year, we hold these scientific truths or these way of believing or knowing about the world. Sometimes those are all we really hold to. And some of the fables or the ideas of the stories of this time of year embodied in many of these songs are just so fantastical and so out there, and as beautiful as we may think they are just not real for us. And others of us will hold the truth in those stories and those songs and talk about that there's something that we believe or there are elements we believe and others we don't. It's a time of year now when it's really drawn into focus for some what we don't believe. In a way, that's easier to talk about when we're talking about the carols or anything else. And it's the great challenge of this faith and really of all of us, perhaps to challenge ourselves to think more and more about what we do believe and less about what we don't. And I hear that a lot in Unitarian Universalism. I've preached it from this very pulpit. And so I started thinking about that. Like, is it really so bad to be thinking more about what we don't believe than forcing ourselves to really get to the nitty-gritty of what we do believe? It brings up this idea of that belief is like this narrow path, but it's very bright and powerful, like using a flashlight to go down a mountain or using a candle to meditate. In a way, some faiths, some religions, that's how they work. They're like a flashlight in the night. They're like a candle in your meditation. It focuses one on a particular way of thinking and lights a particular path that is somewhat easier to see when you have the light, when you have the songs, when you have the ministers, when you have the music. It brightens this light. And then there are others who want to close their eyes. That beckons us to maybe a softer way of thinking, a more inclusive way of thinking, to not focus so much on the candle, on the spotlight, on the flashlight, and instead to feel the warmer light, to close our eyes and bathe in the bowl above us of the heavens, of the stars, about which so many songs, so many stories have been told for so many years. It beckons us to a softer light, to the enfolding of this darkness that we are in this time before the solstice. It brings us into the profundity of matter, really. Matter, what matters in this world. and versus what isn't matter or doesn't matter. And so I turn at these times to one of the great authorities, one of the strangest named, but somehow very powerful sounding groups that we have. I turn to the Science Mission Directorate of NASA. Here's what it says about matter and other things in our universe. It turns out, and I quote, that roughly 68% of the universe is dark energy. Dark matter makes up about 27%. The rest, everything on Earth, everything ever observed with all of our instruments, all normal matter. I know none of us are normal here, but just go with me. All normal matter adds up to less than 5% of the known universe. Come to think of it, again, quoting the Mission Science Directorate of NASA, come to think of it, maybe it shouldn't be called normal matter at all, since it is such a small fraction of the universe. Yeah. See, to explain what some of these things are, you'd need a degree in astronomy, but I got one in theology, so it's almost as good. So I'll just go ahead and dive in with dark energy. Dark energy, more or less, it is a kind of space that expands at the rate that allows or drives the present expansion of the universe. Current theories are that the universe is expanding greatly, and that this thing, this dark energy, its only nature, seemingly its only attribute, is that it seems to expand at exactly the rate that the universe is moving outward. And so that is really all we know about it, that it does. And then this dark matter. Here's a quote. We are much more certain, again, from the Science Directorate, we are much more certain at what dark matter is not than what it is. Here are a few theories about dark matter, which I just find cuter and cuter as we discuss dark matter. If you think astronomers don't have a cute sense of humor, you've got another thing coming, because one theory about what dark matter is that it is large, heavy elements that are hiding from us. They're hiding in brown dwarfs, so we can't actually see them. These are big pieces of metal or matter, and they call them massive compact halo objects, or machos. So the machos are hiding in the brown dwarfs. So that's one theory. Then the other is that they're actually weakly interacting massive particles, or WIMPs. So we either have the machos or the WIMPs that are either hiding or just can't really be seen, that make up more than 95% of everything in the universe. So I'm now rethinking whether or not we are in good company when we are talking more about what our faith is not than what we think it is. Now, I'm not saying you want to build your whole life and your whole faith and everything on just naysaying or saying what it's not, but there's nothing wrong with, it's called apophatic theology, where you think about what something isn't and less about what it is. And sometimes you get to a deeper truth from that. Sometimes you find things out, like in the universe, like the Science Directorate of NASA, that are just true. Because for every 19 things we hear, we only have to think that one is true of the 19 or 20, of the 20 things we hear, we only have to think one is true, and we're doing just as well as the people who explore the universe are doing in their work. And I feel like that's pretty good, right? Sometimes I think that understanding the universe better might be one of those ways we could live into our universalist strand in the future better than we have. Could you imagine a whole church that really understood the way machos and WIMPs react when they're dealing with brown dwarfs? I just feel like we could just wow anyone who comes through these doors if we were a little more up on it. If you haven't seen the movie of A Brief History of Time about the life of Stephen Hawking. I'd recommend that to you. Me and my father saw it together when I was a kid, and it really helped me see things. Scared me to the pants. Yeah, I mean, just the idea that the universe is expanding and that it might contract again, but it probably won't happen in my lifetime. Of course, there are some theories that we're expanding and time is going in one direction. And when space reaches its outward trajectory and then starts coming back is when we live everything backwards, which is what deja vu actually is. But that's for another sermon. That we've just been doing this rubber band contraction and expansion over eons immeasurable. Christmas time. It's just all the things that come up. Because whether we are having the great Christmas Carol conundrum, the great controversy of 1992, whether we are enjoying the peace of the Edict of Torda, whether we're exploring the regions of space or of our own minds, this is the time when we either gather our thoughts, our feelings, our spirits, our humors, we gather each other, don't we? Some of us will gather around a table with family and yell, and others will gather around and enjoy their time. Others of us will gather around the television just to watch sports, to watch all of our Hallmark movies, to watch all the things we love, baking shows. That was me last night. And some of us are already changing our plans because of the rise of yet another virus or another variant that can be a problem when we gather. And just hold it in your hearts, friends, because I have a feeling there might be some things we're going to be having to change at church a little bit, or some plans that we had for the near future that might get a little farther away. So we also gather around the fires of life. We gather and listen to these old chestnuts and old stories that we haul out every year to tell and retell. Stories as different as families coming together or finding some kind of peace over the songs of the season, and stories, these old chestnuts of unrest in territories of the world over issues of belief or non-belief. We gather around the fire and we remember the warmth of seasons past, of seasons when ancestors needed the flame of the fire for warmth to live while telling the tales revealed to them by the stars swinging overhead, of seasons when forebears fled the flames of turmoil to rest in the more expansive, cooler places of understanding, of seasons when people look east to the fire of the rising sun and welcome love into their hearts anew. Part of the struggle of an embracing faith like this one is the struggle between the lights we see all around us here, the lights of solstice, of Hanukkah, of Advent, of Kwanzaa, of even others, and that can only illuminate a fraction, a small part of a universal church, a universal truth, a universal idea. And all of these we have on one hand, these bright shining lights, and on the other, we must hold the darkness, filled literally with powers NASA cannot explain, and also of wonder that makes up the very fabric of time and space itself, that races its own self to the corners of known reality. So much of this time of year, like our reading, tries to light a way, one path, one way. But if you close your eyes on the mountaintop, friends, with your friends all around you, gazing for a time at your eyelids, then opening them up, uncluttered with the lights of human making, we can let the lights of billions of years stretch across the yawning chasm of space and time to touch us in this bleak midwinter that we weather once more, and hold us warm in the embrace of seemingly eternal fires, where every mother's child is going to spy, to see all the many times, all the many ways, all the many kind words and times it's been said over and over from the people that look east, from the people that look out into the world, but mostly for the people that look into their own hearts. The many times it's been said, many times, many ways, I love you. May it ever be so. Blessed be, and amen.